The key was heavier than it should have been. That was my first thought, when the lawyer pressed it into my palm outside the reformatory gates, the metal still warm from his jacket pocket. He had been waiting in a black sedan, engine running, like he knew exactly when I would walk out. Maybe he did. Maybe he had been counting down the days just like I had, though for entirely different reasons. I stood there on the cracked sidewalk, backpack slung over one shoulder containing everything I owned in the world, staring at this stranger in his pressed suit and kind eyes. Behind me, the reformatory loomed, all grey concrete and barred windows. I had promised myself I would not look back when I left, but the weight of 3 years does not release you so easily. The morning air smelled like exhaust, and the particular dusty scent of freedom that I had almost forgotten existed. The lawyer introduced himself as Martin Hendricks. He said he had been trying to reach me for weeks, but the reformatory had strict protocols about contact with inmates. He said the word inmates gently, like it might hurt me, and maybe it did. He said my grandfather had passed away 4 months ago. I told him I did not have a grandfather. He smiled sadly and said that was not quite true. We sat in his car because I had nowhere else to go. The interior smelled like leather and coffee, and the seats were softer than anything I had touched in years. He spread papers across the dashboard, forms and documents with official seals, and my name printed in neat typeface. Emma Rose, Whitmore. It looked strange to see it there, formal and real, as if I were someone who mattered enough for legal documents. The farm was in the mountains, 3 hours north, a place called Pinehaven Ridge. $1.5 million, he said, though the number felt abstract, like hearing about the distance to the moon. The property had been in my grandfather's name, Thomas Whitmore, and now it was in mine. There were no other heirs, no other family, just me. I asked him why I had never heard of Thomas Whitmore, why no grandfather had ever visited or called or sent so much as a birthday card. Martin Hendricks was quiet for a moment, watching the cars pass by on the street. Then he said my grandfather had his reasons, and those reasons were waiting for me at the farm. He said it like that, waiting for me, as if the land itself had been holding its breath. The drive north took us through towns I had never seen, past strip malls and gas stations that blurred into sameness, and then gradually into something wilder. The buildings spread apart, trees crowded closer to the road, the asphalt turned to gravel, and then the gravel turned to dirt, and then we were climbing, winding up a mountain road that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Martin explained what he knew as we drove. My grandfather had been a quiet man, private, who kept to himself on the mountain property. He had owned the land for over 40 years, had built the farmhouse himself, had lived there alone until the day he died. He had maintained a relationship with Martin's law firm for decades, updating his will every few years, always with the same instructions. Everything goes to Emma Rose Whitmore when she turns 18. If anything happens to me before then, hold it in trust until she comes of age. I had turned 21 in the reformatory, marking the date by scratching a line into the concrete wall beside my bunk. Martin said, my grandfather had known where I was the entire time, had known about the reformatory, about the charges, about everything, and he had waited, patient as the mountains themselves, for the day I would walk free. The question I could not ask sat heavy in my throat. Why watch from a distance? Why leave me to navigate the system alone, to survive foster homes and group facilities, and finally the reformatory, all while he lived in comfort on $1 million property? What kind of love looks like absence? The road narrowed as we climbed higher. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into fractured gold. The air changed, became thinner and cleaner, carrying the scent of sap and earth and something ancient. I rolled down the window and let it fill the car, let it replace the recycled air of the reformatory that I still felt trapped in my lungs. We passed a marker that read Pinehaven Ridge, population 47. There was no town, just the sign and a weathered general store with a single gas pump out front. Martin slowed the car, and I saw an old man sitting on the store's porch, rocking in a chair that creaked even from the road. He lifted a hand as we passed, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and I wondered if he knew where we were going, if everyone in a population of 47 knew everyone else's business. The driveway, when we finally reached it, was almost hidden. A break in the trees marked by a mailbox that leaned at an angle, the name Whitmore painted in faded letters on its side. Martin turned onto a path that wound through the forest, overgrown but still passable, as if someone had been keeping it just maintained enough. Branches scraped against the car windows. Wildflowers grew in patches of sunlight between the trees, purple and yellow and white. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. The farmhouse sat in a clearing that overlooked a valley so vast it seemed impossible. Mountains rolled away in every direction, blue-green and ancient, touched by clouds that moved like slow water. The house itself was modest, single-story, built from logs that had weathered to a silver grey. A wraparound porch sagged slightly on one side. The windows were dark but intact, and smoke-free chimney rose from a stone base. It looked abandoned. It looked loved. Somehow it looked like both things at once. Martin parked the car, and we sat in silence for a moment, just looking. The wind moved through the clearing, bending the tall grass that had grown wild around the house. I could hear birds, dozens of them, singing in the trees. I could hear nothing else. No traffic, no sirens, no voices shouting through concrete walls, just wind and birds and the settling of the earth. I got out of the car on legs that felt unsteady. The ground beneath my feet was soft, yielding, covered in pine needles and moss. I walked toward the house slowly, aware of Martin following a few steps behind, giving me space. The porch steps creaked under my weight, but held firm. The front door was painted green, or had been once. The color now faded to something between sage and grey. The key fit perfectly into the lock. It turned with a click that sounded too loud in the mountain quiet, and the door swung inward. The smell hit me first. Not decay or abandonment, but something closer to preservation. Dust and old wood, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs. The interior was dim, light filtering through curtained windows, illuminating particles that hung suspended in the air like tiny stars. I stepped inside, and the floorboards groaned a greeting. The main room was furnished simply. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now but clean, with wood stacked neatly beside it. A couch and armchair, both covered in faded quilts, faced the hearth. Bookshelves lined another wall, packed with volumes whose spines I could not read in the dimness. A kitchen area occupied the back, with a wood-burning stove and a sink beneath a window that looked out onto the valley. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but beneath it, I could see order, intention. Someone had arranged this space with care, had lived here with purpose. Coffee mugs hung from hooks above the sink. A pair of reading glasses sat on a side table next to an armchair, as if their owner had just stepped away and would return any moment. Martin moved around the room, opening curtains, letting in light that transformed the space from tomb to home. I stood in the center of it all, turning slowly, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to reconcile this place with the grandfather I had never known, with the life I had never been offered. On the mantel above the fireplace, I saw them. Photographs in simple frames, arranged in a careful line. I walked closer, my heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The photos showed a man at different ages, starting young and progressing to old. In the earliest, he was barely more than a boy, holding a hammer, standing in front of partially built walls that I recognized as this very house. In another, he was middle-aged, sun-weathered, smiling at the camera with eyes that crinkled at the corners. In the most recent, he was elderly, white-haired, standing on this same porch, with one hand resting on the railing and the valley spread out behind him. In every photo, his eyes were the same, pale blue-grey, like winter sky. The same eyes I saw every time I looked in a mirror. I reached out and touched the most recent photograph, my fingers leaving prints in the dust on the glass. This was Thomas Whitmore. This was my grandfather, a stranger who had my eyes and whose house now belonged to me, and whose reasons for staying away were supposed to be waiting here, somewhere, in this carefully preserved life. Martin cleared his throat gently. He stood by a large wooden desk in the corner of the room, one I had not noticed before. The desk was old and heavy, made from the same silvered wood as the house's exterior. On its surface, arranged in neat stacks, were more papers, and sitting prominently in the center, positioned so that anyone entering the room would eventually see it, was a wooden box. The box was beautiful in a simple way, made from dark wood with brass hinges and a small brass clasp. My name was carved into the lid in careful letters. Emma. I crossed the room and stood before it, aware of Martin stepping back, giving me this moment alone. My hands shook slightly as I reached for the clasp. It opened easily, and I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each in an envelope, addressed to me in the same careful handwriting. They were organized by age, I realized. The first stack was labeled Emma, age 1, then Emma, age 2. Year after year, all the way to Emma, age 21. I pulled out the first envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was yellowed with age, delicate. I opened it carefully and withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in that same precise script. My dearest Emma, it began. Today you turned 1 year old. I watched from across the street as your foster mother carried you out to the car, and you were wearing a yellow dress with ducks on it. You were laughing at something. Maybe the sunshine, maybe just the joy of being alive. I wanted so badly to run to you, to tell you who I am, to take you home to the mountain where you belong. But I cannot. Not yet. Not while he still has power over you. My vision blurred. I blinked and forced myself to keep reading. Your father is a dangerous man, Emma. I know this because he was married to my daughter, your mother, and I watched him destroy her piece by piece until there was nothing left. When she died, when you were only 3 months old, I wanted to take you then, but he had legal rights, and I had no proof of what he was capable of, only suspicions and fears. By the time I gathered evidence, by the time I could have acted, he was arrested for armed robbery and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The social worker who took you told me I could apply for custody, but my lawyer advised against it. Your father still had rights, even from prison, and any custody battle would alert him to my involvement in your life. He had made threats, you see, threats about what he would do if I ever tried to take you from him. I made the hardest choice of my life. I let you go into the system. I stayed hidden, and I watched. I have watched you your entire life, Emma. Every foster home, every school, every heartbreak. I have watched and documented and waited for the day when you would be free, when he would no longer have any legal claim to you, when I could finally give you what should have been yours all along. This farm, this land, this life, it is all yours. I built it for you. I maintained it for you. Every tree I planted thinking of the day you would walk beneath its shade. Every board I nailed hoping you would one day call this place home. I am sorry I could not be there. I am sorry I had to love you from a distance, but I need you to know that you were loved. You have always been loved. Not a day has passed that I did not think of you, pray for you, plan for your future. Wait for my letters to guide you. Read them in order. Understand the whole story before you decide what to do next. With all my love, your grandfather, Thomas. I stood there holding the letter, tears streaming down my face, unable to breathe properly. The words swam before my eyes. Martin had moved to the window, his back to me, giving me privacy in this moment of complete unraveling. I pulled out the next envelope. Emma, age 2. And the next. Emma, age 3. Each one detailed a moment he had witnessed from afar. My first day of school, seen through the chain-link fence around the playground. A birthday party at a foster home where I wore a paper crown and he watched from his car parked down the street. A talent show where I sang off-key and he wanted to cheer but could only watch in silence. The letters progressed through my childhood like a shadow biography. He documented the good homes and the bad ones. He knew the names of my teachers and my friends. He knew when I won the spelling bee in 5th grade and when I broke my arm falling from a tree in 7th. He knew everything, and I had known nothing. When I reached the letters from my teenage years, the tone changed. The entries became shorter, more pained. He wrote about watching me fall in with the wrong crowd, about seeing me make choices that led down darker paths. He wrote about the day I was arrested, about sitting in the back of the courtroom during my trial, about the moment the judge sentenced me to 3 years in the reformatory. I wanted to stand up and tell them who you really are. He wrote in the letter, from my 18th birthday, spent behind bars. I wanted to tell them about the little girl who used to sing to herself when she thought no one was listening, who made friends with stray cats, who always picked up litter she found on the sidewalk because she said the earth deserved better. I wanted to tell them that you were failed by every system that was supposed to protect you, but I stayed silent. I had stayed silent for 18 years. What was 3 more? I could barely see the page through my tears now. I reached for the next envelope in the stack. But Martin spoke from the window. "There is one more letter," he said quietly. "Not in the box. On the desk. Dated 3 days ago." I looked where he indicated and saw it. A single envelope, newer than the others, sitting apart from the rest, my name on the front in that familiar handwriting, but shakier now, as if written by a hand that had grown tired. I picked it up. The paper inside was brief, just a few lines, but those lines sent ice through my veins. "Emma, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are finally free. I am sorry I could not be there to greet you in person, to show you around the farm, to explain everything face to face. My health failed faster than I anticipated, but you are here now, and this place is yours, and I hope it can give you the peace I always wanted you to have. There is something you need to know. Your father was released from prison last week. I have been monitoring his movements through a private investigator. He knows about this property. He knows I left it to you, and he is coming. In the desk drawer, bottom left, you will find a folder marked Evidence. It contains documentation of crimes he committed that were never prosecuted, crimes that happened after his original sentence, witness statements, photographs, financial records, enough to send him back to prison for another 20 years if turned over to the authorities. I gathered it over the years. Insurance, in case he ever tried to come for you. He will come for the farm, Emma, not because he wants the land, but because he wants to punish me for protecting you from him, and because he wants to punish you for being free. Call the sheriff. His name is Robert Chen, and he is a good man who knows your situation. The number is on the fridge. Give him the evidence. Do not try to face your father alone. He is dangerous in ways you cannot imagine. I wish I could have kept you safe one last time. All I can do now is warn you and hope it is enough. You were the best thing my daughter ever did. You were the light I lived for in the dark. Make this place your home. Let it heal you, and do not let him take it from you. All my love. Always. Grandfather. The letter slipped from my fingers and drifted to the desk. The room had become very cold, or maybe it was just me. I looked at Martin, who was watching me with concern. "When did he die?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant. 4 months ago. February 16th. And my father was released last week, which meant there had been 4 months of buffer time. 4 months when I was still locked away, and my father was still locked away, and the farm had sat here empty, waiting, safe. That buffer was gone now. How long would it take him to get here? I asked. If he left the day he was released, Martin hesitated. Depends on where he was coming from. The prison is downstate, about 6 hours from here. But Emma, we do not know for certain that he's. The sound of a vehicle engine cut through the mountain quiet, distant but growing closer, grinding up the dirt road in low gear. Martin and I locked eyes. Every muscle in my body went rigid. "It could be anyone," Martin said quickly. "A neighbor, the sheriff checking in, the investigator I hired to maintain the property." But his hand was moving toward his pocket, toward his phone, and I could see the uncertainty in his face. I moved to the window and looked out through the gap in the curtains. Below, winding up the final stretch of driveway, I could see a truck, old, rusted, missing one hubcap. It moved with purpose, not the casual pace of a neighbor paying a visit. My father drove a truck like that. I remembered it from childhood fragments, from before the arrest, from a time when I was too young to understand what danger looked like, but old enough to feel fear in my stomach when I heard that particular engine sound. "The bottom left drawer," I said, already moving toward the desk. Martin understood immediately. He pulled out his phone as I yanked open the drawer. Inside was a thick folder, just as the letter had promised. Evidence. I grabbed it and turned to Martin. "Call the sheriff." Now. He was already dialing. I heard him speaking in low, urgent tones as I moved through the room, looking for another exit. The front door was the only obvious option, but the truck was pulling up to it now, parking at an angle that blocked the porch steps. I heard the engine cut off. I heard a door slam. Through the window, I watched a man climb out of the truck, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going grey at the temples. He moved with a stiffness that suggested old injuries poorly healed, the kind of stiffness you earned in prison, yards, and bar fights. He looked up at the house, and even from this distance, I could see his expression: anger, entitlement, a predator looking at prey. I had not seen my father since I was a child, but I knew him instantly. Some things live in your bones, in the animal part of your brain that remembers danger even when conscious memory fails. Martin was talking quickly on the phone. "Yes, Whitmore Farm. Yes, she is here now. He is outside." "How long?" His face went pale. 20 minutes. "They are 20 minutes away." The man, my father, started walking toward the porch. His boots were heavy on the wooden steps. He tried the door and found it locked. Through the thin walls, I heard him call out, "Emma." His voice was rough, unused to gentleness. "I know you are in there. Open the door. We need to talk." I pressed myself against the wall beside the window, heart hammering. Martin moved closer to me, positioning himself between me and the door. He was not a large man, not built for confrontation, but there was something fierce in his eyes that said he would try anyway. The doorknob rattled. Then silence. Then the sound of footsteps moving around the porch, circling the house. My father was looking for another way in, checking windows, testing locks. The farmhouse was well built, sturdy, but it was old. I had no idea how secure it really was. Martin was still on the phone with someone, getting instructions, being told to stay inside and stay calm, as if calm were an option, as if anything about this situation allowed for calm. There was a crash from the back of the house. Glass breaking. My father had found a window, or made one. I heard him climbing through, heard the sound of boots on floorboards in another room. The evidence folder was heavy in my hands. I looked around desperately for somewhere to hide it, somewhere he would not think to look. The fireplace. I moved quickly, shoving the folder up into the chimney, wedging it on a narrow ledge just out of sight. My hands came away black with soot. Footsteps in the hallway. Getting closer. Martin positioned himself in front of me, and I wanted to tell him to run, to save himself, but there was nowhere to run to. We were trapped in this room with a man who had spent 15 years becoming harder, angrier, more dangerous. My father appeared in the doorway. Up close, I could see the prison years carved into his face, the lines around his eyes and mouth, the scar tissue on his knuckles. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Look at you," he said finally. "All grown up. Last time I saw you, you were barely walking." His voice was almost conversational, but there was something coiled beneath it, something ready to strike. I forced myself to meet his eyes, to not look away. Some instinct told me that looking away would be worse. "You need to leave," Martin said. His voice shook slightly but held firm. "The sheriff is on his way. You are trespassing on private property." My father did not even glance at him. He was focused entirely on me, studying me the way you might study a thing you own and have temporarily misplaced. "Private property," he repeated. "That is funny. See, my father-in-law might have left this place to you in his will, but you are still my daughter, which means what is yours is mine until you turn 25. That is the law, or at least, that is how I am going to argue it when we get in front of a judge." "That is not how inheritance law works," Martin said. My father turned to look at him then, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I know who you are," he said. "Martin Hendricks, the lawyer who helped the old man keep me away from my daughter, who helped him spy on me, gather his little evidence. He knows about the folder," I realized. The private investigator my grandfather hired must have been less private than intended, or my father had connections, people who owed him favors, people who fed him information. 15 years in prison teaches you how to build networks in dark places. "Where is it?" my father asked, turning back to me. "The folder. The evidence. Where did he keep it?" "I do not know what you are talking about," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Do not lie to me, Emma. I knew the old man. He was thorough, paranoid. He would have documented everything, and he would have left it here for you to find, probably with some dramatic letter telling you how dangerous I am." He moved further into the room, his eyes scanning the space. "So, where is it?" Martin stepped forward. "You need to leave. Now. Before the police arrive." My father laughed. It was an ugly sound. "The police? You mean Sheriff Chen? We go way back, the sheriff and I. I am sure he is in no hurry to get up this mountain. These roads are tricky, easy to take a wrong turn. Get delayed." He was circling the room now, opening drawers, rifling through papers on the desk. I watched him desecrate my grandfather's carefully ordered space, and something hot and furious began to build in my chest. This place was mine, this legacy, this love letter from a man I never got to meet. This was mine, and this person, this stranger who happened to share my blood, had no right to it. "You need to leave," I said. My voice was louder now, harder. "This is my property. You are not welcome here." He stopped and looked at me with something like amusement. "You have got some fire in you. Good. You are going to need it. Because here is what is going to happen. You are going to sign over this property to me. And in exchange, I will forget about the 3 years you spent in lockup for crimes I know you did not commit alone." My blood went cold. He was talking about the robbery, the one that put me in the reformatory. A convenience store holdup that went wrong. I had been the driver, the lookout. Too young and scared to say no, when older kids I thought were friends asked me to help. They had sworn no one would get hurt. They had lied. I took the fall alone, refused to name anyone else, served my full sentence, and now my father was suggesting he knew more about it than I thought. "That is right," he said, watching my face. "I know who really planned that job. I know who supplied the gun. I know everything, and if you do not cooperate, I make some calls, and those people learn you have been considering talking to the police. How do you think that will go for you?" "He cannot do that," Martin said quickly. "Emma, do not listen to him. He is trying to manipulate you." But I could see in my father's eyes that he meant every word. He had 15 years of prison connections, of alliances and debts and leverage. He could make my life very dangerous with a few phone calls, and he would, if I got in his way. "I need time to think," I said. "No," my father replied. "You need to decide. Right now. This place for your safety. That is the deal." The sound of sirens cut through the mountain air. Faint, but growing closer. My father heard them too. His expression darkened. "Looks like we are out of time," he said. "But I will be back. And when I come back, you are going to make the smart choice. Because I am your father, Emma, and you owe me." He moved toward the back of the house, toward the broken window he had entered through. But before he left, he turned back one more time. "The old man thought he could protect you from me by dying and leaving you this place. But he was wrong. You cannot escape blood. You cannot escape family. I will see you soon." Then he was gone, climbing back through the window, his footsteps crunching across broken glass. A moment later, I heard the truck engine roar to life, heard gravel spraying as he reversed and drove away at speed, not waiting for the sheriff to arrive. Martin and I stood in the destroyed room, breathing hard, as the sirens grew louder and closer. When the sheriff finally arrived with 2 deputies, when they took our statements and documented the broken window and promised to issue a warrant for my father's arrest, I sat on the porch steps and tried to process everything that had just happened. The sun was beginning to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The mountains held the light like a bowl, and for a moment, despite everything, I could see what my grandfather had loved about this place. The peace of it. The distance from a world that had never been kind. Sheriff Chen was a patient man with grey at his temples and kind eyes. He told me they would find my father, bring him in, that I was safe now, but I could hear the uncertainty beneath his words. These mountains were vast, full of places to hide, and my father had always been good at disappearing. After they left, after Martin helped me board up the broken window and made me promise to call him if anything else happened, I was finally alone. The farmhouse settled around me in the gathering dark, creaking and sighing like a living thing. I sat in the chair by the fireplace, my grandfather's chair, and reached up into the chimney to retrieve the folder. The evidence inside was comprehensive. Photographs of my father with known criminals, financial records showing money laundering, witness statements from people who had been too afraid to testify before. My grandfather had spent years gathering this, building a case that could put my father away for a very long time. But my father knew about it, which meant the evidence alone might not be enough. He would have plans, counters, ways to discredit witnesses or explain away documents. He had not survived 15 years in prison by being stupid. I set the folder aside and picked up the box of letters again. I had not read them all yet. There were still years of my life documented in those pages. Years of my grandfather watching and waiting and loving from a distance. I pulled out the stack labeled Emma, age 15, and began to read. The letters from my teenage years were different. Less observational, more advice. My grandfather had watched me start to make bad choices, and he had written to me as if he could guide me, even though I would not read the words until now. Do not trust people who offer easy answers, one letter said. You are worth more than you know. If only I had received these letters when they were written. If only I had known someone was watching, someone cared, would things have been different? Would I have avoided the choices that led to the reformatory? I could not change the past. But sitting here in this house, in this place built for me by hands I would never hold, I could maybe change what came next. I read through the night, working my way through the remaining letters. As dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and lavender, I reached the final envelope. Emma. Age. 21. My dearest Emma, it began. If you are reading this, then you have made it through. You have survived everything the world threw at you, and you are finally free. I wish I could be there to see the woman you have become. I wish I could show you around the farm, teach you which trails lead to the best views, where the deer come to drink in the evenings, how to coax vegetables from the rocky soil. Since I cannot do those things, I want to tell you what I learned in my years on this mountain. I learned that healing takes time. I learned that peace is something you build slowly, day by day, choice by choice. I learned that the past does not have to define the future, that you can start over, no matter how late the hour. This farm can be your fresh start if you let it. It can be the place where you finally rest, where you learn who you are when you are not running or hiding or surviving. It can be home. But I also learned that you cannot build a future on a foundation of fear. Your father will try to take this from you. He will use threats and manipulation and every tool he has learned in his dark life. Do not let him. The evidence I gathered is your shield. Use it. Protect yourself. Protect this place. You are stronger than you know, Emma. You have survived things that would have broken most people. You have a core of steel, wrapped in softness, and that is a rare and precious thing. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. Live well, live freely, and know that even though I could not be there, even though I had to love you from the shadows, that love was real. You were never alone. You were always, always loved. Your grandfather, Thomas. I set down the letter and walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, flooding the valley with morning light. Birds sang in the pine trees. The grass in the clearing swayed in a breeze that smelled like earth and possibility. My father would come back. Of that, I had no doubt. He would try again to take this place, to exert control, to make me afraid. But sitting here in my grandfather's house, holding years of love letters in my lap, I realized something important. I was not the same girl who had gone into the reformatory 3 years ago. I was not the frightened child who had been passed from foster home to foster home. I had survived. I had endured, and now I had something worth fighting for. I picked up the phone and called Sheriff Chen. When he answered, sleep rough and concerned, I told him I was ready to turn over the evidence. I told him everything my grandfather had gathered, everything my father had done, and I told him I wanted to press charges for the break-in, for the threats, for everything. The law moved slowly, Chen warned me. It could take weeks or months. My father would be out there somewhere, planning, waiting. Could I handle that? Could I stay here on this mountain knowing he might return? I looked around the farmhouse, at the photographs of my grandfather at different ages, at the careful way he had preserved this space, at the books on the shelves, and the quilts on the furniture, and the morning light streaming through the windows. Yes, I said, I can handle it. Over the following weeks, I began to make the farm my own. I cleaned the dust from every surface, learned the quirks of the wood stove, figured out which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck. I walked the property line, all 100 acres of it, discovering fruit trees my grandfather had planted, a vegetable garden gone to seed, a workshop filled with tools worn smooth by use. The neighbors, all 47 of them scattered across the mountain, came by one at a time to introduce themselves. They had known Thomas, they said. He had been a good man, quiet, but good, always willing to help with a fence repair or a roof that leaked. They were sorry for my loss. They hoped I would stay. I told them I was staying. And each time I said it, it became more true. Sheriff Chen visited regularly, updating me on the case. The evidence was strong, he said. The district attorney was building something solid, but my father had gone to ground, disappeared into whatever network of connections he had maintained. There was a warrant out for his arrest. They would find him eventually. I tried not to think about what would happen when they did, tried not to imagine him showing up in the middle of the night, tried not to jump at every sound. I installed better locks. I bought a dog from a shelter in town, a German Shepherd mix named Scout, who had been trained as a guard dog but retired from service. Scout slept across my doorway at night and followed me everywhere during the day, solid and reassuring. I also started reading my grandfather's journals. I found them in his workshop, decades worth of entries documenting his life on the mountain, the mundane and the meaningful all mixed together, weather patterns and crop yields, and philosophical observations about solitude and purpose. In one entry from 10 years ago, he wrote, "Saw Emma today from across the park. She was reading under a tree, completely absorbed in her book, occasionally laughing at something on the page. She looked peaceful. It is rare to see her peaceful. I wanted to go to her, to ask what book had captured her attention, to share that moment of joy. But I stayed hidden. I always stay hidden. It is the price I pay to keep her safe." I remembered that day. I had been 16, cutting school, hiding out in a public park with a fantasy novel I had shoplifted from a bookstore. I had no memory of being watched, no sense of being seen, but I had been. Always. I had been. The weight of that love was almost unbearable. To be loved so thoroughly, so carefully, from such distance. To be protected by a guardian I never knew existed. It made my father's absence of love even more stark by comparison. He had been there, physically present in my early years, and had given me nothing but fear. My grandfather had been invisible, and had given me everything. 6 weeks after I arrived at the farm, Sheriff Chen called with news. They had found my father. He had been staying with associates downstate, planning, gathering resources. When the deputies went to arrest him, he had run. There had been a chase, a crash. He was in the hospital now. Injuries serious, but not life-threatening. Under guard. He will face charges, Chen said. Multiple counts. The break-in here, the old evidence your grandfather gathered, some new crimes we discovered in our investigation. He is looking at 20 years, minimum. I should have felt relief, triumph, something. Instead, I felt hollow. This man, who had shaped my life through his absence and his threats, was just that, a man, weak and human and broken in his own ways. He had spent 15 years in prison and learned nothing except how to be more dangerous. And now he would spend more years locked away, aging and rotting, while I lived here in the mountains in the home that was meant to be mine all along. There was no justice in any of it. Just consequences. I thanked Shen and hung up. Outside, the season was changing. Autumn was beginning to touch the mountains, turning the trees gold and crimson. I had been here for nearly 2 months, and the farm was starting to feel less like an inheritance and more like a choice. My choice. I spent the following months learning the rhythms of the place, how to prepare the house for winter, how to split firewood and stack it properly, how to coax heat from the stone fireplace. The neighbors taught me what I needed to know, patient with my ignorance, kind in their corrections. I learned their names and their stories. I became part of the population of 47. My father went to trial in the spring. Martin represented me through the process, handling the legal complications, making sure my interests were protected. I did not attend the trial, did not want to see him sitting in that courtroom, did not want to hear him try to justify his actions. I let the evidence speak for itself. He was convicted on multiple counts. 23 years was the sentence. He would be an old man when he got out, if he lived that long. Part of me felt I should care more about that, should feel something other than this quiet relief. But I had spent too many years carrying fear of him. I was ready to set it down. The farm changed with the seasons. Spring brought wildflowers that covered the meadow in color. Summer brought heat that made the pine trees smell even stronger, their sap thick and sweet. I planted a vegetable garden using seeds I found in my grandfather's workshop, following instructions from one of his old journals. The plants grew despite my inexperience, pushing up through the soil like small miracles. I thought about my grandfather often, imagined him walking these same paths, tending these same spaces, wondered what he would think of the changes I was making, the ways I was putting my own stamp on the place. I liked to think he would approve. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the valley. Scout would lie at my feet, peaceful and alert. I would think about the path that had led me here, all the broken pieces and wrong turns, and years of just trying to survive. And I would think about how strange it was that the worst parts of my life had led me to this place, this peace. I had been loved from a distance by a man I never met. I had been threatened by a father who should have protected me. I had lost years to systems that failed me and choices I regretted. But I had survived. And now I had this place, this second chance, this gift given across time by someone who believed I deserved better than I had been given. On the first anniversary of my arrival, I visited my grandfather's grave. It was in a small cemetery just down the mountain, marked by a simple stone, Thomas Whitmore. It read, Builder, Guardian, Grandfather. I had added that last word myself, insisting to the stonecutter that it belonged there. I brought flowers from the garden I had grown, set them against the stone, and I talked to him the way I wished I could have when he was alive. Told him about the farm, about the neighbors, about how I was learning to live in a place without bars or locks, or the constant vigilance of survival. Told him, thank you. Told him I understood why he had stayed hidden. Told him I wished things could have been different. The wind moved through the pine trees, and I chose to believe that was his answer. When I drove back up the mountain to the farm, to the house that was truly home now, I felt something I had not felt in as long as I could remember. I felt settled, not happy, not exactly, because happiness seemed too simple a word for this complex mixture of grief and gratitude and hard-won peace, but settled, rooted, like I had finally found the place where I was supposed to be. That night, I built a fire in the fireplace and sat in my grandfather's chair with Scout at my feet. I pulled out the box of letters and read through a few at random, letting his words wash over me. Then I took out a blank journal I had bought in town and opened it to the first page. Dear Grandfather, I wrote, I am home, I am safe, and I am learning, slowly, what it means to be loved. Outside, the mountains held their ancient watch. The stars came out, brilliant and countless, in the clear mountain air. And for the first time in my 21 years, I went to sleep without fear, surrounded by the walls built by hands that had loved me, in a place that had been waiting for me all along.